Well, welcome everyone that's just joining. We're going to wait just a moment more to make sure no one's still logging in. Well, excellent. Again, welcome. My name is Grant Price. I'm the head guide for Blue Ridge Mountain Guides. And we'll start off with doing some introductions. I'll just talk briefly about BRMG. And then Mike Pascal and Mark Vanover that are here with me will do intros, and we can jump right in to questions from everyone. To access the Q&A functionality of Zoom, down at the bottom of your screen, you're going to see a Q&A box. You can click on that and then type questions in there. And then we can entertain as many of those live as possible, as well as respond to those in text. So as the webinar is going on, I'm going to moderate here, so you may see me focusing more so on the screen and typing rather than responding. So Blue Ridge Mountain Guides is a AMGA accredited business. AMGA is the American Mountain Guide Association. And in the South, on the East Coast, there's actually just 2 accredited businesses. So we're pretty proud of being one of those. We are a year-round guide service. During the warm months, we operate rock climbing in the mid-Atlantic states of Virginia, West Virginia, and North Carolina. Everything from people climbing for the first time outdoors to working with folks on high-end multi-pitch self-rescue skills, things like that. During the winter, we have a ice climbing program in Virginia around the Wintergreen Ski Resort. Mike works with that. And then during the wintertime in New Hampshire, we also have a ice climbing program, and then are working on starting up more of a ski program up there. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mike to introduce himself.
Hi, how are you doing, guys? My name is Mike Pascal. I've been guiding for about 3 years now, just short, and it's quite fun. I've been climbing since I was, gosh, almost as long as I can remember. Since I was a little kid, I started in the Cub Scouts when I was really, really young. And then I was in the Army and did a lot of mountaineering with the Special Operations Unit I was with. Got to travel all over the place, just like they advertise, and got to climb fun mountains. And that ended up, turning into my passion for being a climbing guide and instructor. So yeah, I'll pass it on over to Mark.
Hi, everybody. First, I hope everybody is safe and healthy out there in these crazy times. My name is Mark Vanover, and I've been climbing almost 40 years, so I've been doing this for quite some time. I did guide a little bit back in the 90s, but guiding actually took away from my personal climbing because I did have another professional career. I was fortunate enough to retire pretty early, about 5 years ago. And I've been guiding the last few years, been working with Grant. I actually do live in New Hampshire. However, I come down south last year, probably 2 weeks out of every month between May and actually late October. And then obviously, as Grant has already mentioned, we do winter programs up here in New Hampshire. So welcome. Look forward to taking lots of questions on just about anything you guys would want to answer. I've been very fortunate to have climbed at all sorts of disciplines and all over the world.
Excellent. To give you a little more background on myself, I've been in the climbing industry for around 12 years, and the majority of that has been spent doing rock instruction. And I've been in alpine and ski stuff for around the last 6. I'm certified as a rock instructor through the AMGA. I provide single pitch instructor courses and assessments, and I'm an apprentice alpine ski and rock guide. So with that, do folks have questions we can help with? If you want, go ahead and start entering stuff into the Q&A button there. If not, we can just kind of jump on to, I think, some topics of interest with the current times. So while we're waiting for questions to hopefully come in, you know, I'm on a daily basis working with when we're going to be able to operate again and start climbing. And it's a challenging dilemma. Right now, there's really no regulation out there that's preventing climbing in most parts of Virginia and West Virginia. We have closed up shop at ERMG through the end of April and hoping to make some calls here in the next week or so about what May is going to look like. Yeah, it's just a matter of the climbing communities really are not welcoming folks traveling into the area. They're trying to protect themselves and their communities, their healthcare system that just doesn't have the same infrastructure as other places. All right, so jump into question number one here. This one is, I wanted to know if we would be interested in showing belay technique for bringing up 2 seconds in parallel. And yeah, I've talked with this person a little bit over email about this technique, so we can definitely jump into that. What I'm going to do is move over to my anchor setup and get some gear put together. And while I'm doing that, we'll maybe jump to another question. Let's go to the last one on the list. Mark and Mike, between you two, do you all want to work on that question?
Okay, let me look at the questions here.
Are we talking about the question from Jason?
That's correct.
Okay. So I like belaying with a munter if I need to be away from the anchor. So if I need to be farther away from my master point so that maybe I can see over the cliff edge so that I can keep visual contact with my climber, the munter hitch is a great option. It also allows you to quickly tie off the rope into what we call a munter mule overhand or an MMO. So yeah, the munter mule is, or the munter is a great option for belaying.
I tend to use a munter as a belay more so in the alpine and in winter and some of the terrain that we work on. It's much quicker, it's much more efficient, and you know, in regards to movement in the winter, it provides a level of capability of continuing movement, whereas you know, using any sort of belay device gets to be a lot slower, and a lot of time maintaining core body temperature and things like that is really important in alpine environments. So you want to keep moving, and that's probably, from my guiding perspective, where I would probably use a munter most often. Of course, you know, there are other times when, you know, it's not winter and it might be the way to do it, and again, it might be more in an alpine environment where you want to continue to move along.
And to add on to this, just in looking at Jason's question in depth there, I think he may be referencing fixed point belaying from the anchor. You know, if you're belaying a leader while they're leading the pitch above the anchor, you could, in theory, belay from your harness with a munter hitch. That would be acceptable. Something to think about there is that the braking plane is going to be different than if you were belaying with the munter off the anchor, bringing up a second. And then really something you maybe kind of opening up as the idea of fixed point belaying. And there's some great resources online from the Canadian Mountain Guide Association. And it is something that I use usually off of ice climbs when there's an overhead hazard. And I've got, you know, omnidirectional anchor points, ice screws, or potentially on a rock route with bolted anchors. So hopefully that unpacked that a little bit. By all means, though, submit another question if you want to dive further into that. All right, so I'm going to move over and set us up to look at parallel. And again, while I'm doing that, does somebody else want to take over and do a question?
Yeah, so I'll answer the question. I'm from Pat K. I'm kind of a newer SPI. I got my SPI certification in 2018. I got certified. I worked with BRMG before that. Grant was my mentor. I'm not sure. I believe he did the same with Mark as well, where basically we couldn't work alone by any means. We worked under Grant, as Grant being a rock instructor, and we had to be within visual sight. And then once I had completed the course, I had to be within radio distance. And then obviously once you get the actual SPI certification, you can begin to work autonomously. But Grant's an incredible mentor. He's got an incredible amount of experience. He's been guiding for a long time. And like I said, I started a lot of my more technical climbing with the military. And the way we do things in the military, it's, different from the sheer safety that's built into everything that a guide does. Everything's really hasty in the military. And that's not something that we do as guides. So learning under Grant has been incredible. He's absolutely been a game changer for me. So yeah, BRMG has had an incredible mentorship for me. And I guess Mark could speak to that as well, because like I said, he was also mentored by Grant before ever having an SPI.
Yeah, absolutely. And to second what Mike said, Grant's been a great mentor, and even now he's a great mentor. It just goes to show that no matter how long someone has been climbing, that you can't continue to learn new and better ways of doing things and more efficient movement and safer techniques. And like I said, even though I've been a climber for almost 40 years, I've certainly learned a lot in the last few years that I've gone through. And I had a mentor like Grant and also others, but haven't taken my SPI. It's invaluable, and I think for any person that is interested in being some sort of professional in this industry, you will continue to learn, and you can take your skill set to whatever level you can and want to. So there was another quick question there about alpine training in the Southeast. So, from a winter perspective, obviously there's probably not a lot of alpine winter training down in the South. From a rock set perspective, I would just look at any of the areas in North Carolina that probably have, longer routes, because the real thing is key in the alpine is being able to move efficiently. So if you can find somewhere, whether it be someplace like Stone Mountain or maybe somewhere out in Pisgah and Brevard area that has long multi-pitch routes, it's really about climbing efficiently in belay transitions and deciding how you actually want to move through the terrain as opposed to swapping leads or climbing in blocks. So there are areas that you can get to down south that certainly give you the opportunity to practice those techniques and skill sets. Mike, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, and a lot of the times with, just like Mark said, finding the routes that are a bit longer, just because alpine climbing it's all about suffering on the long route with bad weather. And like Mark said, finding different ways to approach the difficult terrain. So finding things that are going to give you, a little bit more of a challenging technical area. I think that, North Carolina definitely has a lot of good spots that, you can build some technical scenarios for yourself that will help you train for true alpine environments. Obviously, doing these scenarios in poor weather is good practice as well, because in alpine environments, one of the biggest factors is obviously the weather and your ability to maintain technical proficiency in that terrible climate.
The other thing that I'll say in regards to alpine climbing, whether it be alpine rock routes or alpine days in winter, it's not just looking at it from the technical aspect and making sure you can move efficiently. It's actually being fit, and being able to put in long days, and as Mike said, suffer a little bit, because if you're truly in an alpine environment, your days could be mighty, mighty long. You might start at midnight and be climbing through an entire day and not getting back to camp. You could have 20-hour days easily, depending upon where you're at and what you're doing. So fitness is really important. A lot of times in the winter, I do winter ascents on Mount Washington in New Hampshire, which has some of the worst weather anywhere in the world. And I get a lot of guests that come that are super fit, but super fit in ways that are not going to help them in an environment of moving uphill. So it's not about being how strong. A lot of it is aerobic fitness and being able to just continue to move. Make sure you hydrate, make sure you have the right nutrition throughout the day. There's a whole host of things, regulating body heat, things like that. Those all go into understanding, alpine environments, whether it be an alpine rock climb or an alpine ice route. Grant, looks like you're ready.
Yeah, just to add to those past questions on alpine stuff, for me in the south, Seneca Rocks is kind of my go-to. There's a very alpine rock structure, lots of loose stuff. So dealing with those hazards, it's a large enough objective that with doing some link ups, you can give yourself, a grade 3 to grade 4 day. And then there's fourth class terrain. So you get practice with the rope work. And as Mike was previously saying, deciding what degree of protection is appropriate for given terrain. So yeah, Seneca is my go-to down here. Going to Pat's question on mentoring at BRMG, we do offer out to anyone that takes a SPI course for us, and certainly somebody that did a course with another provider, if they want to come out and shadow a group day with us, we're more than open to that. The main criteria is just that we do get a waiting list for people wanting to do that. And then we need to have a day where there's a few guests out with us. So we don't have like 2 guides and then just 1 student for the day, and it doesn't feel overwhelming to them. And then I also check in with guests before we schedule anybody to come out and shadow with them.
So Grant, before real quick that you show the belay technique in parallel, Pat, is sort of a follow-up question. He asked in regards to what works best from a fitness training perspective, whether it be running or hiking with a pack. I really think anything that you can do from a cardio perspective is really helpful. For me, being, a little bit older, I don't run anymore. It just beats my body up. So I do hike quite a bit. Being in the winter when you're always carrying a pretty big pack, whether it's an ice cragging day or whether it's in a winter ascent of Mount Washington. In the summer, I'm on my mountain bike all the time for cardio, and it just works for me. So I think, it's really what works for you and, what provides you the best benefit. I'm just not a runner.
I'm kind of the
I do run.
Oh, go ahead, Mike.
I do run, and I enjoy hiking as well. So I do a bit of both. Naturally, with guiding, just carrying all this gear around, it's great for you. It's good for your shoulders to be accustomed to carrying that kind of weight. But the leg strength that you get from running, but like Mark was saying too, like any kind of cardio you can get is awesome. I do jujitsu as well, so that keeps cardio up really well for me. Because running is absolutely terrible for your joints, but it's super good for cardio. So, and yeah, it's one of those things that honestly, like, it's good for suffering too, because running is suffering.
Yeah, I think moving as much as you can through terrain that's going to be similar to the alpine objectives you're going to do. So trail running is great. I, as well, am not a runner, so I mountain bike quite a bit. And oftentimes I'm going for duration and staying in a lower heart rate zone. I'm not doing a whole lot of high end, like sprinting stuff. It's more about getting out there and putting in a lot of time and mileage. All right, so I'm going to go into Will's question on parallel ropes. With parallel ropes, this is a more advanced way to move in multi-pitch terrain. And oftentimes it's selected for efficiency so that you can have two followers climbing simultaneously. And I would say really question whether or not you have time pressure and you need to implement this. It can be more cumbersome for the leader because they're going to be dragging two ropes up the route. And then you've got two people climbing one above the other. There's the potential for rock fall to be much more consequential. With that, I'm going to show you how I rig at my harness for this. I've tied in with a figure 8 retrace on my tie-in points with the rope that I'm going to lead on. And then I've done something unique with the other rope. I have clipped that on a small asymmetric D locking carabiner and done an overhand and a bite. A shortcoming of this can be if you get confused, you might be clipping just that and not be on belay. That being said, most of the time with parallel ropes on rock, you're going to clip both of them together, so that tends to not be that big of an issue. But the reason for this is to be able to take this off of me and switch back to caterpillar mode to climb a pitch one at a time. And then the locking carabiner and the overhand knot just gives me a knot profile that's symmetrical to my figure 8. So when I grab the ropes to clip, it goes smoothly. All right, so at the master point, first secure myself. And there's quite a bit with the rope management here, and we won't necessarily get into all that, but I'm going to clip in the non-lead rope, and then I'll clove hitch myself on the lead rope. And from there, I need a belay device that accommodates two ropes. This could be an ATC guide or a reverso, something that has a plaquette hole. Or if you're going to be doing a lot of this, you might opt for a plate style device that has more gradual edges and larger aperture. This is a Kong Gigi. This really saves my shoulders and elbows when I'm belaying like this a lot. And it allows me to keep up with the climbers so they get a much better belay. Communication is a big part of running parallel ropes. The followers have a lot of work to do actually to keep the ropes from getting twisted. So I want to let people know how they're going to climb. I give some basic instructions, things like, okay, when the ropes go tight to you all, wait until you hear me say that you're on belay. And if for any reason there's a communication breakdown, just wait 15 seconds and I'm going to have you on belay. The way I can do that is by having my device pre-rigged. So I pull the rope up and then punch it right into the belay device. That helps managing the risk of somebody prematurely unclipping. Then once they're going to climb, it doesn't really matter which order they climb in on most pitches. There are some exceptions. So I just let folks know whoever's going to climb first, just tell me, hey, climbing on whichever rope color they're on. So kind of James Bond style, we're going to take away your name and give you a rope color. So climbing on purple or climbing on red. That person will start climbing. The other person that's going to climb last can be taking down the anchor since both ropes are on belay. Adds a little efficiency in there. And then when they're ready to start climbing, they'll just let me know climbing on the other color rope. As they're climbing, the person climbing second to the leader, when they get to pieces of gear, they're going to just rotate the carabiner on the trad draws and take out their rope, keep going up. If you're using quick draws, this is challenging, right? Because you have a stopper on there that prevents the carabiner from rotating. So a lot of times you'll see guides clip quick draws upside down when they're doing parallel ropes so the carabiner can be spun. And then I'll let people know that if at any point the rope is in their way, to go over top of it, just climbing over top of it as opposed to underneath it. And then if tangles do get into the system, that's not a big deal. Just shake them and then they'll run up the climb and I'll manage them at the belay and we'll fix it before the next pitch. So those are my basic instructions for folks. So I'll pull the rope up, get both ropes on belay. And as I'm belaying, I want to maintain a grasp on both strands. So I'll just split the ropes in between fingers. And I'm belaying just like that, guiding the rope up with my non-brake hand and then pulling it through with my brake hand. One thing you want to be aware of with parallel rope technique is the potential for the device's auto-blocking nature to be defeated. Where this can happen is if these two climber strands aren't together. So for example, you've climbed a traversing pitch and the first follower gets to the last piece of gear, they unclip it, and then maybe they fall and they take just a small gradual pendulum that's non-consequential, but then that pulls this way on the device while the other climber is pulling that way. I'll let go of my brake strand here for demo's sake, but that's preventing the other climber strand that's going back across the traverse and through pieces from being blocked. Whereas if those stay together, it still auto blocks. So something to be aware of on specific pitches when you're selecting this and as you're placing pro. Beyond this, there's some rope management that needs to be done to efficiently transition and do the next pitch. And I'll leave that for a later point. All right, cool. So another question here. So following up on the Munter question, any reason to not belay a leader from the fixed anchor instead of the harness? And then just to clarify, is that referring to fixed point belaying? All right, so I'm going to pull up a video and share my screen so you can check this out. I won't show the whole video, but just so you get an idea of what comes to mind to me when we're talking about belaying. Okay, so right from the master point. Yeah, so if you're going to do a fixed point belay for the leader and they're leading, you're belaying at the anchor, you don't necessarily want to be at a traditional master point. You want to have the master point shrunk up to a omnidirectional anchor. And this needs to be something, again, like a bolt or an ice screw. So let me share my screen. Mike, is that coming across? Fixed point belaying?
Yeah.
the video is not wanting to play. But you can see in this photo, what they've done is create a master point down here where this big Petzl Williams carabiner is hanging. And then the munter hitch that they're belaying the leader with is clipped in to this, again, shrunken redundant loop, clipped with a locking carabiner directly to a bolt. And so that's some of the criteria there, making sure that, again, it's an omnidirectional anchor, like a bolt or an ice screw. You're using a locking carabiner, and then you're creating a short redundant loop here. And that loop I'm referring to needs to be of soft gear. You couldn't just do it directly off a carabiner. You need something in there to be able to rotate so you don't get torsional forces. And then if you just Google fixed point belaying, you'll find this video from the ACMG, and they show some examples of people taking falls, things like that. And in terms of application, where I find myself doing this is when, one, there's the potential for high fall forces. So maybe we can get in a factor 2 piece, but there's still the potential for a lot of force right off the anchor. Maybe it's a hard move. Maybe there's a significant weight difference in the climber and the belayer. I'll use this for kids belaying me on a multi-pitch climb, where I think there's some reasonable chance of me falling. And then above head hazards, if you're worried about getting yanked up into a roof or an icicle, anything like that, this can be a great choice. Sometimes on standard route in New Hampshire, I'll use this. You can climb a first pitch about 100 feet up to a cave that has some bolts in there. And then if you do the right side of it, you kind of exit from underneath this cave feature, and the belayer has some potential to get ripped into the roof if you were to take a fall. At this point in this video, they're just showing a munter hitch. The munter hitch is somewhat simplistic in that it doesn't need to be redirected. You could also do this with a ATC guide or a reverso hanging off of the redundant loop there. The thing you have to be aware of there is that it has to be redirected for the beginning until you've got pieces clipped on the route, and the video will go into that. Beyond fixed point belaying, which again I use pretty seldomly, it's a tool that I'll pull out when you have that scenario that it's warranted. But beyond that, most of the time I'm belaying with a assisted braking device like a Petzl Grigori or Edelrid Joule, ATC Pilot, something like that. It gives a good amount of security to the leader. So we've got a question here. So Grant, you said the first climber you're bringing up in parallel system needs to rotate the carabiner when unclipping the rope. What was the reason for that? Yeah, so let me escape the system here and grab a quick draw.
Can you take down your screen, Grant?
Yeah, absolutely. Do you all want to field other questions in there while I'm changing over?
So there was a question that was up when you started doing the parallel instruction, Grant, that I don't know if it's up there real quick anymore, but it was from GSTA, and it was about, with COVID-19 and not being able to climb, how are we, doing things that are specific to climbing to maintain our climbing conditioning. I guess that really depends upon, where you live and what you might have really locally. I mean, I'm pretty fortunate. I've got a couple pretty big boulders in the town that I live in New Hampshire, and I can actually just go out and kind of traverse around the bottom of those just to keep my fingertips in shape for when we get an opportunity to go back out there and actually climb. You know, I spend a lot of time doing cardio stuff, probably more so than anything. I don't have a hangboard. I do have a chin-up bar, and I do some chin-ups and pull-ups and things like that. But you know, I'm probably working and trying to stay in shape a little bit differently than maybe someone that's climbing super hard, because I'm not climbing super hard. If I go out and clip bolts on a 10, you know, that's pretty much what I'm climbing these days. Let's see if there's any other questions up here.
All right, I'm back for that question on parallel ropes.
So I'm going to answer the question from Pat K in regards to what types of ropes we use. I'll talk specifically, and you know, I think one of the parts of the question was in the winter. We use single rated ropes for bringing up guests in parallel or caterpillar. We don't use half ropes in a situation where one guest is going to be on each rope. So, you know, we'll use like 9.2s in the winter. I actually think we have a couple 9s that we probably use also, but it's a single rated rope for parties of 3 and bringing them up in parallel.
That's a great question. Okay, so in terms of rotating the carabiner, in selecting draws for this application, you could go all trad draws. Then the carabiner moves freely on either end, or you may want some quick draws. I certainly like to have these on a lot of routes. And then I'll show you the flip around deal here. But let's say you've got just a trad draw to start. You can see that the ropes are hanging perfectly parallel coming from the belay device. And when the first climber gets here, if they can't get to their rope, they need to be able to rotate the carabiner to get their rope out of there. And this is important to help prevent twist, but also so that they don't trap themselves. People will sometimes do kind of weird things there and end up with, say that's like fixed to the wall, and they'll unclip it such that they end up trapped, and then they can't get past the gear. So that's some of the significance of the rotation of the carabiner. And then, yeah, if I was using a quick draw, I would just clip it upside down so that there's a carabiner that they can rotate still.
There was a follow-up question in regards to half ropes and twins and the difference between them. And essentially a twin rope, there's a different test from the UIAA, which certifies ropes. But the easiest thing to remember, twin ropes, you have to clip both ropes through the same piece of protection. And half ropes, you can actually split the ropes. So half ropes are great if you're going to be on a route that might have a little bit of wandering to it. You can keep, you know, the ropes tied into your left side. You kind of keep it on the gear that might be on the left side of the route, and keep the other rope that's on the right side of you on gear that's on the right side of the route. So just think of it as twin ropes always clip together from a protection perspective, and half ropes can be split.
Then, Mark, was that speaking to Pat's question on do you always use one rope, or do you use halves and twins for ice and alpine routes?
Yeah, well, I asked Pat, I answered that question and said we always use single rated ropes if we're bringing up more than one person. Um, but I didn't specifically answer the question in regards to if it's just a long route and I think I need to rappel, then I could use half or twins. I tend to use half ropes personally on alpine routes. There was a question up there about bringing up people together, and that's where I said stick to the single rope for bringing people up in parallel. And then I was responding to Jason's follow up on the difference between half and twins.
Cool. Yeah, just going back to Pat's question, with just one other person that I'm climbing with, sometimes I do use twin ropes. I don't find a whole lot of application for halves. Sometimes, there could be a route where you need to, split the ropes to try to prevent pendulums, and that might be worth taking halves out for that. But yeah, I do take twins out on routes where I need to be able to rappel a full 200 feet in one go, and I will do that as opposed to taking a pole line, especially if I'm going to do multiple 200-foot rappels. And again, I'm just out with one person. So in North Carolina, that comes up a lot. But pole line can also be a good choice. A pro to taking the two ropes is that it's a little easier rappelling and you don't have to carry the haul line. You're just, the pole line. You're just climbing with it. But on the downside, you now have two ropes that the belayer has to manage the entire time. All right. So go up to Rob's question. How would you transition over the edge in single pitch terrain if you had run out of static line? You can't single strand rappel. Two options that come to mind for him would be to rappel off the high master point if using a backside BHK or a 3-in-1, or to use friction hitch on one of the anchor legs. Yeah, but not ideal to be hanging over the edge of the cliff on just that. Really what you need. What's that?
The all-in-one system? Because then you're just using your rope instead of the static.
Yeah, and I think based on the factor of running out a static line, the 3-in-1 or all-in-one Fox system might not be applicable. One thing you could do is leave an anchor on the top of the cliff, kind of like you mentioned there. You could maybe like put a anchor around a tree like a cordelette and put a locking carabiner or two opposite opposed non-lockers. Do a balanced rappel to get over the edge. And then once you're over the edge to the master point in the static line, you could connect yourself directly to that with a rappel extension or tether, and then pull your rope, then put it into your master point, and then continue on down. I'll show you one other kind of guidey trick that I'll occasionally use for that. And then while I'm setting that up, Mike and Mark, if you all have other thoughts on that.
Let's see.
So, yeah, I mean, there's obviously, everything just kind of depends on the terrain that you're subjected to. Oftentimes the cliff isn't just a sheer like 90-degree angle that you're going over. And you can kind of just do a smaller rappel and come down. Sometimes what Grant had explained is the best way to do it while maintaining back to front efficiency, where you're not having to go back up and over. Because you can oftentimes move one of the legs of your anchor down a little bit lower maybe, so that you can preserve a bit of that static line. Or move down, connect another leg, connect yourself to that leg as long as both legs of the anchor were bomber, so that you can rappel down off the one leg, connect yourself to the second leg, as long as you're not hanging over a ledge, and you can maintain your footing there. Like I said, it just kind of depends on the terrain that you're afforded. in the scenario where, you're looking at a 90-degree angle. What Grant was explaining is probably the best way to go about that.
So just to, William, if you're still hanging out with us, to try and be specific, I think I answered your question, but I looked at it again, and, you asked about bringing 3 people, or, climbing as a party of 3 with half ropes. And from a guide perspective, and from a mitigating risk and safety perspective, we wouldn't use half ropes to bring up 2 separate people in parallel. We would use singles. So we'd use skinny singles. Like I said earlier, we in the winter, I'll use like a 9 or a 9-2 and have 2 of them. And yeah, ropes get expensive, but that's just the way we do it from a guiding perspective, because that's the best way to mitigate risk, is climbing and having our guests climb individually on single ropes as followers.
All right, so I'm going to show a lower out setup here. And what I've got rigged up in theory is a V-rig, or Joshua Tree style system. And we'll say that this leg is going over to a tree that'll constitute an anchor that I'm comfortable hanging over the cliff edge on. And then maybe this leg is going up to some components, maybe 2 fairly good cam placements. The master point here is hanging over the edge of the cliff, and I'm working back here trying to get myself over. What I could do to create a lower out is on the anchor side, it'd come in back away from the cliff edge, put in a clove hitch, and then a locking carabiner. And then I'll tie in to one end of the climbing rope, close the other end of the system, and the other end can just be going over the cliff or out towards the cliff edge at this point. One tool short here, got to grab a Grigori. And what I'm going to do is put the climbing rope in and set myself up to lower out with the Grigori. And this is going to allow me to go out over the edge of the cliff. Depending on what the transition over the cliff edge is going to be like, I might also want to go ahead put some carabiners on the master point. If I have a mid-marked rope, find the middle there. And then build my rappel extension, back that up. And that way I'm connected to more as I go over the cliff edge, and I don't have to deal with as much once I'm hanging over the edge. So see, there's my middle. Putting on a friction hitch backup. And then depending, you may want to put double loop overhand on a bite or a BHK below that just as an extra backup. Cool, so I've got everything pre-rigged as best I can there, connected into multiple things going over the cliff edge. I rappel over the edge on the Grigori, and then once I've weighted my new system, the rappel extension off the master point, once that's good to go, I can take off the greegery. Clear a knot, pull the rope. That carabiner is just going to stay up there while we're on this system. And then I'll close the system off, and then I can begin to rappel down on my extended rappel. Would somebody like to talk about the all-in-one or the three-in-one Fox system?
Go ahead, Mike.
So the all-in-one is when you use a climbing rope, a dynamic rope, instead of your static line. With this system, you're using cordelettes around, say, a natural anchor or on active or passive protection in a crack in the wall. And you're connecting it with either figure eights on a bite or a clove hitch. And that's going to go down to 2 carabiners. So it basically comes down like a V. I don't know if anybody wants to see my drawing here. Let's see if we can do a little drawing to show this. So, out of the way. Here we have a nice tree. Got our anchor point around there with just some cordelette. And then our rope is on a figure eight on a bite. It's coming down and back up to another tree. And then this also has an anchor point on it with another cordelette. And then we're gonna throw a clove here. And then that's gonna leave a bunch of rope to come down here. That can be put onto your carabiners here to lower yourself over the ledge there. Does that make sense? So it's just a way to basically use your climbing rope instead of your static line. I believe it was made by, or it was coined, you heard Grant call it the Fox system. Fox Mountain Guides down in North Carolina deal with some unique terrain down there, and commonly used in terrain that they use, and it's all just dependent on the terrain that you're provided and the gear that you have available to you on what's best to use. So you just kind of have to be fluid with that and have a couple different ways to build your anchors with different gear so that you can be a little bit flexible with what the terrain offers you.
And then one other thought on the 3-in-1 is just the name there. Really the configuration is having a upper master point that's on top of the cliff, 2, a lower master point over the cliff edge that you can top rope from once at the base, and then 3, a lifeline tether, that strand of static going over the cliff edge so you can transition from the top of the cliff to the bottom. As Mike mentioned, it's very specific to terrain. It's challenging to implement this a lot of times because it uses a lot of rope. Places that it works well are where you have anchors relatively close to the cliff edge. Maybe you're on a small, medium-sized ledge, and it's very climbing instructor oriented. Single pitch instructors use this so that they can maybe come into the top of the cliff and then lower someone or give them a blade rappel to the base of the cliff, then transition the system to a base managed site as the instructor transition over the edge and rappel to the bottom. And then everybody's at the bottom and they can top rope from there. Yeah, okay. If I talk about the um, end roping that Jason's mentioning.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, question is, with three people, do you ever use just one rope with a cow's tail? Um, Sometimes it depends on the terrain and also what kind of an objective you're doing. On alpine climbs, it's not uncommon to climb end roping, as we refer to it, maybe the majority of the route. And then for short roping, where we're in third and fourth class terrain, using the cow's tail and end roping folks is quite common. Um, in terms of doing a fifth class climb, it would have to be, to me, something lower graded. Um, Last season, I had a very alpine day on Seneca Rocks. It was actively raining, and I was climbing with two folks that were quite strong climbers, and we made the decision to end rope up Old Man's Route, which is 5'2". It's really blocky. There's a lot of ledges. Um, and for their climbing ability, it was an okay match. It was a little less comfortable climbing end rope for them because they had to move with each other, but it allowed us to overall move faster to get up to the summit. Um, and then certainly we had a little bit slower rappel down, just having one rope between all three of us to do the rappels at Seneca. Does anybody want to take the question from GSTA on rappel stations?
Yeah. So if you're, so I guess what you're looking for is, assuming nothing already exists, or it's weathered, so you need to leave behind gear. They obviously try to not leave behind gear if at all possible. It violates leave no trace, which is something that we're big on. There's normally ways that you can do retrievable rappels off of natural features and things of that nature to get yourself down. But if you had to leave something behind, cordelettes are cheap. But like I said, if at all possible, we definitely do our best not to leave anything behind. There are like webbing rappel stations and stuff like that. That those are typically changed out every season. You have to inspect it before use. That way you can get down and use these rappel stations. A lot of times, if there's bolted anchors, you can do a retrievable rappel, and you're not gonna leave your cordelette up there or something like that. But yeah, I mean, typically just to keep with leave no trace principles, we do our best to not leave anything behind. But if you have to, cordelette's not that expensive.
So I'll answer that a little differently based upon my experience. You're right, Mike. In the winter, it's all about A threads or V threads to get down ice routes. If there's not, rappel stations off to the side of a route, that's a quick, easy way to get off a climb, doing an A thread or a V thread. I will say this, sometimes to get off routes, obviously not in a guiding situation. This is certainly from a personal experience perspective. I spent some time in the Canadian Rockies and kind of lost the descent route and had to come down off of a peak. And there were a couple of rappels involved. And I just basically, took some webbing and tied a bunch of knots in it and jammed it in a crack, just as you would a couple nuts, and equalize it as best as possible to use that as a rappel, because I didn't really have a lot of gear to actually leave behind. So sometimes you improvise to get off, because getting off is the paramount thing. But obviously in the winter, A threads, V threads on ice climbs is a really, really great way of getting down without leaving anything other than maybe a piece of cord, a sling, or if you do what's called a naked thread, you just thread the rope through it. You can pull your rope. But if it's a wet day, you don't want to do that.
In dealing with this dilemma, a big part of what I carry is a small knife. this gives me a lot of options, and it helps with the leave no trace aspect of this. One thing I can do is any kind of nylon sling that I have, and it does need to be nylon as opposed to Dyneema. I can cut this 4-foot nylon sling, put that around a feature like a substantial block or a tree, and then tie it back together with a water knot, and then rappel from that. During the winter time, as Mark mentioned, having a little bit of cord. If you do need to do an A thread or a V thread, you can't do it naked, and you need to leave something behind. Having a little cord can be nice, and this is significant because oftentimes you're carrying Dyneema slings during the winter, so there's the issue with the knot, and then Dyneema is a little bit more expensive. And then the other thing with the knife is that if I show up somewhere and there's a ratty anchor, if I don't need to use my cordelette for the rest of the day, I might go ahead and just take the knife, cut all the old stuff out, and then leave behind a fairly pristine, redundant cordelette anchor there, hopefully with some wrap rings or quick link on there for the next folks to use. Well, excellent. So it's rolling up to a little past 8:30, and I've had some awesome questions. Well, got one more here. With the water knot or cordelette, are you pulling the rope directly against the nylon material? Yeah, anybody want to take this one?
In regards to the winter, sometimes just leave a lever beaner if you have one. I usually sometimes have old beaners just to leave them if I have to bail on something that I wasn't expecting to. I try not to rappel off of something without leaving a beaner or carrying a wrap ring, because a lot of times someone might come behind you and want to use it, and they may not inspect it. So I try and leave something behind, metal, so to speak.
Yeah. If I need to conserve carabiners and I don't want to leave anything behind, I might rappel solely off of the soft gear, but then I've damaged the soft gear by pulling my rope. And I think a maybe even more important question to ask is, if you arrive at a rappel station and there's no hardware there, you want to really scrutinize that material and make sure that people haven't been just pulling the rope and things are frayed through and it's going to fail. Oh, cool. So got another one here on rock climbing med kit essentials. Anybody want to take that one? Maybe Mike, you want to do it?
Yeah, so I have a pretty extensive medical kit that I leave at our home base, wherever, like kind of our base of our climb. It's like a full grade EMT kit. That what I take with me on the climb in my brain is also fairly expensive. We're all wilderness first responders at the least, and that it's a 80-hour course that we all take at least every 3 years, and it's pretty extensive. So we basically carry anything to handle trauma. We're prepared to handle any kind of spinal injuries. So we carry a C-collar. We'll carry a I'm spacing on it. It's for a splint, but it's a foam splint.
Sam
splint. There you go. Sorry, the actual commercial name that it's just a piece of foam that's got some aluminum in the center of it, so it's flexible, and so we can create a splint with it. So your assortment of bandages and gauze, some water and soap is the best thing to clean wounds with. And oftentimes we'll have water with us, obviously. So typically what we're worried about in rock climbing terrain is obviously abrasions and rock fall. So there's a large risk for head damage, head injuries and things of that nature. So we're trained to assess head injuries. We're also prepared for if people have certain pre-existing medical conditions, such as asthma or any kind of allergies to anything. We're prepared for anaphylactic shock. In those cases, we'll ask guides to make sure that they have epinephrine with them. We're all certified to inject epinephrine in the case of asthma and an allergic reaction and anaphylactic shock. And then we also are CPR certified. So those are kind of like the bare minimums of. We can also do dermabrasion, which is like cleaning the wounds. We're all certified in cleaning your wounds. This is all stuff that we'll only practice if we're not within the ability to have an ambulance come to you. So if we're off of a road or something and an ambulance can just drive up and help you, they're more certified, and we can keep you stable until then if need be. But what a wilderness first responder is somebody that is typically, if you're in the wilderness is viewed as something that's more than like 100 miles from definitive or secondary care or advanced life support. We can provide basic life support to keep you stable. And this is probably going a little bit more in depth into it than need be, but that's basically what we're trained to provide is that basic life support to ensure that we can get you to the advanced life support. And that's essentially what a wilderness first responder is. We're trained to use, very little things. So we all have tourniquets to be able to, maintain wounds that, are through arteries that may cause somebody to bleed out. There's a whole number of things that can happen in the mountain. Obviously, people fall and through rough terrain, there's rocks. So the biggest concern is going to be, lacerations from rock fall or, a head trauma from rock fall or from somebody falling in general, and just some kind of a laceration. And obviously, in the ice climbing terrain, you've got the added, you've got picks on your hands and feet that are essentially knives that can do a lot of damage. So there's a lot of different things that we anticipate and that we're prepared for when we're in wilderness environments. So it's a pretty extensive medical kit that we carry while we're in the woods.
So the interesting thing, just to add to that, even though the question was more geared towards rock terrain, in the winter, we carry everything Mike just basically said that we carry. And because of some of the environments that we work in New Hampshire and being above tree line and very harsh alpine environments, something as simple as a sprained ankle above tree line on a pretty bad weather day could actually become life and death. So as a guide, I also carry a small warm sleeping bag, a couple of emergency, those emergency and medical things for keeping warm, and also carry something called a Bothy bag, B-O-T-H-Y. They're really big in Europe, and basically a Bothy bag is a portable shelter, because we can be in some environments, it could be 40 degrees below zero with winds, and like I said, a sprained ankle could become a life or death situation in those circumstances. So you keep people warm, you get the Bothy bag out, and then you get help, try and get them off there.
Awesome. Yeah, good thoughts on med kits. I'm kind of a minimalist. I typically try to think about what life-saving interventions can I realistically do in the backcountry. And to me, that's CPR. So having a mask and then stopping major bleeds. I like to have either a commercial tourniquet for field use or materials I can improvise one. And then beyond that, over-the-counter meds. I want to have aspirin for heart attacks, and then Benadryl for allergic reactions. Other than that, everything else is for comfort, Band-Aids, ibuprofen for headaches, something like that. Cool. So I'm going to close it down. Again, thanks everyone, and take care this evening.